The FeiyuTech Scorp Mini P is a smartphone gimbal similar to the Zhiyun Smooth 5 and the Hohem iSteady M6. As a piece of mechanical engineering, I give it the thumbs up. The main weakness of this gimbal is the app which comes with it. In the first section of this video, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the pros and cons of this device. And then after that, we'll have a detailed walkthrough of all the gimbal functions, and we'll look at the FeiyuTech ON app as well. There are extras that you can purchase for this gimbal, such as the AI tracking model and fill light. So we're going to have a look at those too. Let's go through the pros of this gimbal, starting with the max payload. The Scorp Mini P is said by FeiyuTech to have a max payload of 520 grams, and that is 120 grams more than the Hohem iSteady M6 and 220 grams more than the Zhiyun Smooth 5's max payload. This means the gimbal should be better able to handle extras such as filters and lenses. But like with any dedicated smartphone gimbal, you won't be able to use a cage because a cage is going to be too big and too heavy for this gimbal. The Scorp Mini P comes with an unusual underslung handle, which I've actually never seen in a smartphone gimbal before. And this allows you to hold the gimbal more comfortably in a lower position.
But it's really more than that. For certain shots, the extra handle makes it easier for shots like sideways dolly or a low to high shot as well. This allows you two hands for more stability and control. And in general, for more complex gimbal movements, having this extra handle gives you a better grip and movement.
The Scorp Mini P comes with a number of useful buttons and controls. There's a multifunction wheel, which allows you to control the pan, roll and tilt axes. As well, using the FeiyuTech ON app, the wheel can be set to control zoom or focus. So we've got dedicated buttons for the inception mode. And that means you can easily shoot barrel rolls at different speeds. And luckily, you don't need to use the FeiyuTech ON app. The Scorp Mini P allows you to switch between vertical and horizontal mode simply by twisting the clamp. And as well, this gimbal allows you to position your phone's cameras either to the left or right.
So here are some of the things which I don't think are as good as its competitors. I did find that the app is pretty limited compared to the other gimbal apps. And it's also not the most intuitive to use. All you get is the most basic functions. I mean, there are features like gesture control and subject tracking, plus we do get a kind of manual exposure that doesn't really work. But apart from that, there's not much more. I would say that in general, the gimbal is a little bit more fiddly than I'm used to. And this just means spending a bit of extra time getting used to things. For example, the way the controls are spread out and as well having two different grips. And also the gimbal itself is a little bit bulkier than the Smooth 5 and the iSteady M6 because of this extra grip.
Now personally, I prefer to use other camera apps for filming most of the time anyway. I don't usually use the gimbal app, not just this one, but on other gimbals as well. So the poor quality of the app doesn't bother me too much. And I would say that this is more of a filmmaker's gimbal than a kind of casual creator's gimbal. So that actually suits me as well. But if you want something that's kind of more fun, smaller, easier to carry, and more user-friendly, then I would say that this gimbal might not be for you. Now, before you get started, you'll probably want to install the FeiyuTech ON app. Although the gimbal does not need to be activated like a lot of other gimbals these days, it's probably a good idea to mount your phone and connect to the gimbal and then install any firmware. There's this little icon, so you just tap that and you can find out if there's new firmware to install. If it doesn't tell you, but actually when it did tell me that there was firmware, it sort of, the little notification disappeared pretty quickly. And I had to go hunting to find where to download the firmware. The Scorp Mini P has a lock for each motor. And actually when you're balancing your phone, you want two of the motors to be locked. So that's a little bit different to other gimbals. So these locks work by inserting a little rod into a notch on the motor casing. First of all, leave the pan motor locked and then unlock the roll motor. Finally, unlock the tilt motor. Turn the arm so that the clamp is upright and then lock it again. And you can see here that there are two lock positions for this motor. So in other words, there's two notches, and one of these is for storing it away and the other one is for balancing. So we're just going to lock it into the balancing position. Now you can just place the phone in the clamp, and if we want to switch between horizontal or vertical. We can just twist the clamp and you can keep twisting it and you can go either way as well. Now the roll arm can actually be on either side, so you can just choose which way you want it. So to balance this gimbal, like with the M6 and the Smooth 5, we need to slide the roll arm left and right until the phone doesn't flop to one side. Now we need to loosen the lock for balancing just by turning it. Then just move the arm left and right until the phone stays level once you let it go. And now we can lock the arm again by tightening this screw. As well, you might want to move the phone up or down in the clamp to get the phone perfectly balanced. Once you're happy that the phone is balanced, unlock the 2 locked motors and power on. Power on the gimbal by long pressing the power button, which is located at the other end of this underslung grip. So that's a bit of an odd place to put the power button, isn't it? But it does work fine, it's no big deal, and perhaps it actually stops you from pressing it by accident. To change gimbal modes, press the M button. But the mode indicator is a little bit different to other gimbals because there's a light for each motor. So this light by the motor indicator, so we've got pan, tilt and roll, and when the light goes on, that means that that motor is going to follow your movement. When you have a light by the pan motor, it means that the gimbal is going to only follow your pan movement. And if you have a light by the pan and tilt, it's going to follow your pan and tilt movements. And when all 3 are lit up, that's when it's in FPV mode and it's going to follow all 3 movements, pan, tilt and roll. Now there's actually a button specifically for FPV mode on the side, so you can press that to go straight to FPV mode, and when you press it again, it goes back to whatever mode you were in previously. And if you have the app connected, you're going to get a message for each mode. Now for some reason the app calls FPV mode all follow in the app and not FPV, but it's basically the same thing because it's following all the movements, like I said. Also, the symbol above the settings cog tells you which mode you're in. If you double press the M button, you put the gimbal into sleep mode, and then you can just press it once again to wake it up. And if you press the M button 5 times, the gimbal is going to perform a horizon calibration, and that's going to make sure the camera is level with the horizon. By default, the multifunction wheel controls the tilt axis. So you just turn the wheel and then the camera is going to tilt. And next to it is the button which changes what that wheel does. Press once and you're going to hear a short kind of buzz sound. Turn the wheel and now you are controlling the pan motor. Press it again and now you're going to control the roll motor. And I do find that the motors really react well to how you turn the wheel. Fast, slow, speed up, slow down. I'm not sure how much I'd actually use this, but it does work well. Now long press this button and you will hear 2 buzz sounds. So this switches the wheel to zoom control, but that's only going to work if you're connected to the FeiyuTech ON app. And you're going to see this zoom slider on the left of the screen, and as you turn the wheel, it zooms and the line on the slider moves. And you can also move this with your finger. Short press this button again, and it's going to switch to focus control. So again, you get the same with this slider thing, and you can use your finger to adjust focus manually. So you can use this for focus pulls and just controlling focus. But like I say, you do need to use the FeiyuTech ON app, which you might not want to do. If you short press, you go back to zoom, and focus goes immediately back into auto mode. But if you long press, you're going to get more buzzes, 3 buzzes, and it's going to return to controlling the motors again. The trigger is on the main handle, while the control panel is on the end of the underslung handle. And this means that you often end up using 2 hands to operate the gimbal. So we've got the battery indicator, which has 3 lights, and when they're all green, the battery is full. When the right one flashes red, it's still, in good condition. When the middle flashes red, that means we're sort of halfway through the battery. And when the left one flashes red, that means you're, about to run out. On the right, the Bluetooth indicator tells you if your phone is connected to the gimbal. The joystick is touch sensitive, so you can make the gimbal move fast or slow depending on how far you push it. And actually this joystick is one of the better ones that I've used on a smartphone gimbal. It just feels a little bit more pro. It's like I say, this gimbal just has that sort of well-engineered feel about it. So this button, which is record or shutter, does what you'd expect. It takes photos, or it starts and stops recording. And this depends which mode you're in, of course, and using the app you can actually switch between photo and video mode by long pressing this button. And if you half press this button, you can set focus using the Gimbal app. At the bottom of the control panel are 3 buttons, and these are for inception mode. Press the middle button with the A to go into auto inception mode. So the gimbal now points directly upwards, and the idea is that you can now angle the gimbal to point in any direction. So this is one situation where the underslung grip comes into play. Press either the L or the R, which stand for left and right, to start a barrel roll. Then press record to start recording when you're ready. There's actually 3 roll speeds here. The first speed is medium, and then press again for fast, and then if you press it once more, you'll switch the roll speed to slow. And when you want it to stop turning, press the A button again. And if you want to exit inception mode, press the A button for a second time. If you're using the FeiyuTech app, one tap on the trigger starts object tracking. So at the moment it needs a face to track because of how the trigger is set up, but you can still draw a box over an object to track it instead. If you do want it to track objects when you tap the trigger, you can actually change that in the app settings, and I'll show you how to do that later. Tap the trigger once more to stop tracking. Double tap the trigger to recenter the gimbal. And if you triple tap the trigger, the gimbal will spin 180 degrees so that the rear cameras are facing you. Now if you press and hold the trigger, you will enter locked mode. And that means none of the motors will react to any of your movements, so it will just keep the camera facing in the same direction all the time. And as soon as you release the trigger, it will return to the previous mode. There's 2 function buttons on either side of the control panel. Double press F1 to open the media gallery. Double press F2 to go into flash follow mode. So when you do that, you'll see that the 3 motor indicators start flashing. So this mode is kind of like sport mode in other gimbals, and it just means that the motors are going to react faster to your movements. And if you want to exit this mode, just press the M button once. Now, as I said, the app which comes with this gimbal does feel a bit underwhelming compared to its competitors. And actually the competitors' apps have already set something of a low bar, haven't they? And we have to understand really that when it comes to smartphone gimbals, app development is really a very different skill to mechanical engineering. Anyway, this app is not particularly user-friendly, and there are some kind of important settings which are hidden away, and you have to click through pages and menus to find them. But anyway, let's go quickly through it. Bear in mind that I'm using an iPhone 15 Pro, so you might get a different experience with other models. Top left we have the photo video mode switch. Below that button is a button which opens up a menu for various shooting modes. And these will be different depending on whether you are in photo or video mode. So let's just go through the video options. We've got regular time-lapse. We have tracking on time-lapse, which is where you program a camera pan or tilt with the time-lapse. So I would call that a motion lapse. So we also have dolly zoom and smart dolly zoom. With the regular dolly zoom, you get various settings, which means that you have to know what you're doing. With the smart dolly zoom, it tries to walk you through it. But you know, in my opinion, with any gimbal, the easiest way to shoot a dolly zoom is basically just to shoot a push in or a pull out and then just digitally zoom the opposite way when you're editing. It's much easier to do it than using one of these apps. And you have a lot more control. There's also slow motion and a thing called light rail mode, which adds light streaks to photos and videos. Next button down is the shutter or record button, and to the right of that we have these 2 buttons for focus and zoom. And if you tap them, you open up the manual focus or the zoom slider. This is actually pretty glitchy because I found that these buttons vanish. When you switch modes, you actually get this little brief glimpse of them to raise your hopes, but then they suddenly vanish again. But remember, you can access these using the control wheel. The only way I found to get them back is to close and reopen the app. Below the record button is the front to rear camera switch, but that's actually the only camera switch on the main screen. Tap the settings button, bottom left, to open up more options. Scroll to the bottom and tap the 3 dots for more settings. Now if you scroll down a bit, you will find a switch for the ultra-wide camera. So if you toggle that on and then go back, you will find that you're now using the phone's ultra-wide. Well, hopefully. At least it did with my iPhone. So that's pretty long-winded, isn't it? And I couldn't find a way to switch to the telephoto, but maybe it's hidden somewhere. I have looked, but I can't find anything. So I think that no, you can't. So I would say that this app doesn't allow you to use the telephoto. Like I say, the app is not very intuitive. It's not very user-friendly. For example, if you try to switch to HDR, it says mode not support, even though I'm actually in normal video mode. And it did the same when I switched to photo mode. So I don't really know what that button's for. If you want to change video resolution and frame rate, you need to go back into that More Settings menu where we found the ultra-wide switch, and then scroll down to video resolution. Open that, and now you have resolution and frame rate combos. So we can choose 4K and 30 frames per second, or 4K and 60 frames per second, for example. If you want manual exposure control, toggle on advanced mode. And at the top, you now have ISO, white balance, exposure, and EV at the top of the screen. Tap them to open a slider for each. But you know, it actually doesn't really work, at least on my iPhone 15 Pro anyway. If I tap ISO and then reduce it to 55, and then I tap it again to close the slider, ISO goes back into auto. There's no shutter speed, unless the EXP setting is supposed to be shutter speed. But if I try using that slider, it does these kind of weird things. Anyway, as you can see, you probably shouldn't use these settings. And like I said at the start, I would recommend this gimbal to those who don't really want to use the Gimbal app anyway. They just want it for the design and the extra max payload. There are uses for the app aside from what I've shown you so far. Here's one interesting feature which allows you to set the motor strength. Tap the settings cog bottom right, and this page allows you to change gimbal mode, horizon level, and on the right we have a remote joystick control. So I'd say that this page is really for when you're using a regular camera, so really for a different gimbal. And then you want to connect your phone only to use it as a remote. So I think you can discount this page, but if we tap the second settings cog on this page, now you have a bunch of new settings. Tap motor strength and you can adjust the strength of the motors. But you can also get it to calibrate this for you. Tap the self-adapt button and it then starts vibrating and sort of wobbling as it tests the motors with whatever you've mounted to the gimbal. And my guess is that this is going to be different depending on how heavy your phone is. Like, you know, if you have a big phone compared to a small phone, or maybe you've got some lenses and filters mounted to the phone, which is going to affect the weight distribution. So if you do change your setup on your phone, you might want to quickly run this to get the motors at optimal performance. Now, if we go back one page, and we can change what the trigger does. At the moment, single tapping the trigger enables smart human body tracking. So it's only going to track people. But we can switch this to object tracking instead. Or we can actually make it so that single tapping the trigger switches the camera from rear to front. So again, this is all if you're going to use the FeiyuTech ON app. We can also change what holding the trigger down does. We can set it to any of the regular gimbal modes. So there are some uses for this app, even if you don't want to use it for actually recording video. As an extra purchase, FeiyuTech do an AI tracking unit, which allows the gimbal to follow a person and you don't need to use the gimbal app. It mounts onto the phone clamp magnetically, and you can phase it either way, so you can use front or rear cameras. And then you need to plug it in to the USB-C port on the bottom of the arm. There's a camera and there's an indicator light. The light should pulse red when it's ready, and then you use gestures to operate it. Make this OK sign with your hand, but make sure the camera can see your face. When I first tried this, nothing happened because my face was out of shot. But once I bent down to make sure I was in shot, it started tracking. Just hold up the palm of your hand to start recording, or take a photo if you're in that mode. And this actually works even with other apps, as long as your phone is connected via Bluetooth. Then hold up your palm again to stop recording. To stop tracking, hold your hands with thumbs pointing either inwards or outwards. Another extra purchase is the fill light. And this attaches magnetically like the AI tracker. But as there's only one place to put them, you can't have them both attached at the same time. However, they do come with this, which is a stick-on metal strip. So you could use this to add an extra mounting position. Not sure where you'd put it, but maybe on the arm or something. The fill light is completely self-sufficient, so you're going to need to charge it via the USB-C port, and all the controls are physical on the light itself, so you can't power or control the light using the gimbal. But there is a plus side, and that is that it doesn't drain your gimbal's battery. Downside is that you need to charge this light separately. There's only one button on it, just long press it to switch the light on and off, and then you use the slider on the top to adjust brightness. And if you want to adjust the temperature, just short press the button to cycle through different temperature levels. To add a mic or an SSD to this setup, you're going to need to move the phone away from the tilt motor. And then actually I recommend that you use one of these, which is a 90-degree USB-C adapter. And they're pretty cheap, and you can find them, everywhere, AliExpress if you want, or Amazon. So this is going to make adding things to the phone's USB-C port a lot easier. I'll put links to all these accessories in the description of the video.